Mr. Chidambaram's calculations are predicated on the assumption of good growth, fueled by his budgetary proposals. Will that indeed turn out to be the case? That's the central question, because a lot depends. A lot that has been predicated on the Indian growth story depends on this assumption. Let's discuss that. Joining us, Mr. Adi Godrej, President of the Confederation of Indian Industry, Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, Hero Motor Corp Limited, Managing Director and Chairman of Hero Corporate Services Limited. Also joining us, Mr. S. Gopalakrishnan, President Designate of the CII. Let me begin with you first, Mr. Godrej. Many people have chosen to use different terms to describe this budget. One common theme that seems to recur from expert to expert is that this is an inclusive, please all constituencies poll budget that plays it safe and that will be forgotten by the markets by the end of the day.
Well, I think it's a development-oriented budget. I think, as you put it, it's an inclusiveness-oriented budget. I think the expenditure increases he has proposed are in the right direction by and large. I think they will add to growth. I think some of the areas in which he has proposed increases, like agriculture, especially technology in agriculture, in skill development, etc., are well based. I think the most important thing is clearly that he wishes to contain the fiscal deficit. Even in this year, he has said that it will be 5.2%, which is even slightly lower than the original target of 5.3%, and next year at 4.8%. This is the right direction, because if we contain fiscal deficit, it helps in many directions. It contains inflation, it adds to growth, etc. So I think generally it's a very well-directed budget. If you look at all the finer points he has made in the budget, they tend to address the problems we have faced, including things like helping investment through investment allowance, encouraging people to invest in the stock market, mutual funds, the insurance industry spreading across. So overall, I think it's a very well-directed budget, and if it's implemented well, I think it can certainly excel. Yes, but I think if you look at it, since Mr. Chidambaram has been appointed the finance minister, generally implementation in the country has improved, and the directions towards implementation have improved. So I'm hopeful.
Do you share that opinion?
Yes, I believe that this is a pragmatic, realistic, growth-oriented budget. It also has focus on small and medium enterprises. Now, he has clearly said the 2% CSR, which is coming now, can be directed to incubators. He has talked about MSMEs carrying forward the benefits for 2 more years after they have crossed the threshold. He looked at MSMEs listing without an IPO under certain conditions. He has looked at increased allocation for National Innovation Council. So, you know, if you look at innovation, entrepreneurship, small and medium enterprises, plus the focus on infrastructure, you know, the roads, for example, you know, a new regulator for roads and things like that. He's talked about a tax reform committee. He has talked about GAR getting into the issues related to GAR getting into the Income Tax Act, Rankachari committee report being implemented. So in that sense, I think it is positive.
Okay. Do you share that outlook? Because there are several, Mr. Munjal, expenditure allowances. Now, Mr. Godrej says that this budget could go a long way in addressing the fiscal deficit, but there are some who have come out and said that that is an area of big concern, because a lot is predicated on growth and the realization of revenues through growth. There should have been an additional stream of revenue generation, perhaps outside of the budget, that may not have been able to be harnessed by this minister.
First, let me say broadly I agree with what both Chris and Adi are saying, that this is a budget under the current circumstances in economy, both Indian and global, has done a fairly good job of balancing the need to manage the fisc and at the same time try and find ways for growth. Both are necessary right now, because the downgrade by global rating agencies would have been disastrous for us right now. Having said that, I will talk about some of the areas which need more attention or did not get attention, and this is to the point that we were discussing.
I just want to come back to the point you're making.
Yeah.
When you say that he seems to have been able to develop the revenue streams through the budget to raise revenues, to balance the fisc, etc. Also,
Yep.
of course, the current account deficit.
Yep.
Let's
Not
be a little
current
more
account.
specific.
The current account has not really been addressed. That's one of the concerns. I was
Okay,
going to
so-
talk about the concerns.
So fine, let's break
So,
it down. There's
yeah.
a surcharge on the super rich, there's a surcharge on companies, there's
Yep.
amnesty for service tax defaulters,
Yep.
there's a selective increase in excise rates.
Yep.
Will this all mop up the money that is required really for all these expenditure allocations?
Well, the total additional spend is talked of is 200,000 crores. And this number apparently matches up to 200,000 crores, which is additional revenues, which is talked about in the budget today. I'll tell you where the concerns are. That for the current account deficit, there's no clear roadmap. That's a bit of a worry for me. Because in some sense, that is an even bigger problem than the fiscal deficit right now for us. The overall budget is practical and populist. So he's, in a sense, been able to strike that balance. There are a few things which are a bit concerning. Either they are not clear or they are actually genuinely concerning. For the tax treaty countries, he has said that to get the double tax avoidance benefit, the residency certificate is a necessary condition but not enough. So I don't know what that means. It's actually spooked some of the investing community, which he's actually tried to placate, because he started off by saying we need growth, we need investment, we need foreign investment, and we need sustained investment. So he has done some good for them in the sense of defining FII and FDI limit, just made it very, very simple based on the percentage of the company you own, not anything else. The second concerning thing is that all the cut that has taken place is actually in the plan expenditure, not in non-plan. About 67 or 70,000 crores has been reduced from capex, and we want government today to invest. We want them to build infrastructure projects, because that is a great multiplier for the rest of the economy.
Well, those are persuasive points, Mr. Godrej. Would you therefore, in the light of some of these points that have been made, want to revisit the presumption that this could actually go towards addressing India's concerns as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, and also, of course, the credit rating agencies?
No, I think the fiscal deficit is being met even this year. Two things are happening. One is the subsidies will reduce considerably, because, for example, diesel prices are being increased every month, so the subsidy bill will be much less. Disinvestment will be higher. For example, one should start disinvestment from April itself. Why wait till the last quarter, as we do almost every year? So he has done about 20,000 crore of disinvestment just in the last quarter. So it's quite possible to get much higher disinvestment based earnings. So I think the fiscal deficit number can be met. Once you meet such a fiscal deficit number, it brings inflation down, which means the Reserve Bank can reduce rates. It means that GDP growth will be accelerated. It gives a lot of win-win solutions to GDP growth. And I think his GDP growth estimates are quite reasonable for the revenues taken into account.
Well, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, the reason I'm bringing up this point again and again is that he did mention at the beginning of his speech that there is a definitive need to bite the bullet. That's what he said. Now, there were many proposals or suggestions that were made. Let me correct that. Suggestions that were made. One of them was fast-track GST. So far, we've had no real commitment on GST. There was a rollback excise.
I disagree with you. That statement is incorrect.
Okay, let me just spell out what was made, and then we'll take them up point by point. Rollback excise and service tax cuts given after the recession, impose surcharge on the very rich, which has of course happened, and levy commodities transaction tax.
So he has, clearly articulated the roadmap for GST. He said a lot of work has already been done, and he will endeavor to implement it in this fiscal year itself. He's also talked about introducing the direct tax code in this session itself. Yeah. So, I strongly believe that if you look at what he has done in the last 6 months, his statements during the budget presentation and his intent in the next 1 year, I think it's all very positive. I know things take little bit time, but it's not a lot of time. He is saying a lot of things will get done immediately. I think that is what is important.
Well, let's not forget, this is an election budget, Mr. Godrej, and a lot predicates on the atmospherics that the union minister would create around the budget. So are you surprised that he's sounding so optimistic? Because there is parliamentary logjam. There are issues, there is a trenchant opposition that has a problem with a lot of the proposals